and welcome to this webinar. The NextGEOSS webinar series are again active. We have had a bit of a hiatus during the summer, but we will definitely compensate now in October and November and December. We have awesome webinars lined up. We are starting a little bit early here, so we will wait for people to join us. But my name is Bente Liljaby. I'm going to be your host today, and I'm a partner in the NextGEOSS project. So this is a NextGEOSS webinar series. Before we start with the webinar itself, we usually do a weather report. This is a trademark for my webinars. And we can start with, I think we will start with Martin, because I have three excellent speakers here today, but I will not let them speak until they give a weather report. So, Martin, what's the weather like? Where are you?
Hi, Penta. I'm in Vienna. Weather is a bit cloudy, 15 degrees, but a very nice day. So, yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Glad to have you on for sure, Martin. And Emmanuel, where are you and what's the weather like?
I am in Brussels, and we have quite a great day today. For the moment, we avoid the rain, but I think it will be soon, unfortunately. Pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Welcome again, Emmanuel. We are very excited to hear about your reports. But before any more reports, Simon, where are you and what's the weather like where you are?
Hi, Bente. Nice to see you again. I am in Paris, France, and it's quite sunny and warm. You can maybe see the light behind me. I think it's about 17 degrees, and it's, I think, the last push of summer before the fall sets in.
That sounds about right. Myself, I am in beyond the Arctic Circle today, and we have a beautiful weather. You see a little bit of the sunshine here. I'm sitting, I wish I could share the view with you, but I can't. We have beautiful, beautiful sunshine, clear skies, and it was below zero this morning, by the way, but now it's better. It's a beautiful day. So on this beautiful day, we also have exciting information to share with you. And before we start to share all that information about the Earth observation industry, I would like you to notice that you can ask us questions. During the presentations, we would like you to ask the questions. You can start to test this chat box by saying who you are, what's the weather is like where you are. That would be awesome as a warm-up, so we get this broad weather forecast here on the NextGEOSS webinar series. We will have a Q&A session at the end, but maybe also we can have some questions in between each of the presentations. So please do ask questions that you have to these presenters. So today, the program is we will try to be finished within the hour, maybe before even. It depends on how active you are, but we have set aside 1 hour. And we start with the reports that is public, so the ERSC report on the European industry, the health and the state of the European Earth observation industry. And we will also get a sneak peek then of another report from Euroconsult that will cover the whole value chain from Earth observation gathering to products to its use. And we will finally, but not least, we will dive deep into one niche of the industry sector, namely the agri-technology startup ecosystem. That will be Martin giving us that presentation. So that's the program for today. And with that, I think we are ready to hear about the ERSC industry report. Emmanuel, the floor is yours. Let us know who you are and what you do as an introduction, and then we dive into your presentation.
Thank you, Bente. So my name is Emmanuel Pajot. I am a project manager at ERSC. ERSC is a trade association representing the downstream industry. I'm really excited to discuss with you, to present you the industry survey that we have freshly released. So I will share my screen and see. Yep. So the industry survey is a very important document for URSC. We publish this survey every other year. It is more than a report. It's really a tool for stakeholders, such as the Commission, ESA, for example, in order to understand more about what the definition of Earth observation downstream. A tool for companies to improve their understanding on the ecosystems they belong. So that's why for all the companies we represent, 121 companies in 23 countries in Europe, this document is really important. So my first slide is, I would say, a summary. But please, first, note that this report is available on free on the URSC website in the library page. You will have the link on the top right of this slide later. I want to raise that for the first time, the industry survey this has been made without Canada. Revenues coming from the Canada were included before, and we removed it in order to improve the overview of Europe. The key message of this presentation is that the Earth observation downstream industry is healthy and presents a significantly growth in terms of number of companies, employees, and revenues. So let's go in detail now. First point is about company. The total number of companies increased by 55, which means about 6% rate per annum, which is similar to previous years. But this number undermines company which no longer exist from going out of business or merging with other company. And we identified 53 of them. It means that the total creation of company between the previous survey based on 2016 numbers and 2018 is about 103, which represent a creation rate of 12%. An interesting point is the size of the company. The Earth observation sector is still obviously characterized by a lot of micro companies, about 2/3, and only 1% of large company. But what we can see for the first time is a slight increase of the percentage of medium company. So maybe kind of consolidation to be confirmed. Second key element is about the employment. Employment is a key indicator. Over the last 5 years, the number of employees have grown fairly steadily at a rate of about 10% per annum. This trend continues. Earth observation industry has created an incredible 1,500 jobs during the period 2016-2018. This is bigger increase is in the medium and the large company. Another interesting point is that for the future, in the next 12 months, close to 80% of companies are really planning an increase of job. Revenues. This section is a bit particular, so I just want to raise 2 points there. The first one is that I want to recall that the numbers we use have been made without Canada's. So basically, from the numbers you have seen in 2016, same total revenues is the number of total revenues is the same, 1.2 billion, but it was without with Canada before, without now. The second point is about this green, the red bars you can see on top. This is linked to a project, contract won by Airbus in 2015, the World Dam contract, which is a 4 years contract of 450 millions. So as we don't know the split, of course, we had to estimate the split between the years. Nevertheless, the survey confirmed the continuous and significant increase of the demand of EOS services with still a 10% growth per annum. An interesting point is about the evolution of the delivery model or the processing. Traditionally, the Earth observation market is a bespoke market, one product, one service, or one product. This survey highlights a kind of significant change. The Earth observation sector is moving to a more automated processing technique, with more than 50% which are produced automatically and 20%, more than 20% automated. In 2016, for memories, Earth published a position paper presenting online services as a future key component of the Earth observation market. It was planned to represent 20%, 25% of revenues in 2025. With more than 20% of revenue coming from automated services, we can imagine that the step to this could be even reached before. In terms of market, defense and security is the most flourishing one and presents a significant growth from around 20% in 2016 to 30% in 2018. Agricultural, environmental, pollution, and climate were already identified previously in the top 4. But oil and gas, which were present there before, moved to the 5th position, whereas emergency services moved to the 7th, to the 3rd one. So there is here several points. There is a Canada effect. Some significant Canadian actors were deeply involved in the environment market and are not taken into account here. But even in Europe, we have identified that some big players have really developed the share related to security and defense. Another interesting point is about emerging market. Construction, real estate, and alternative energy have significantly improved their ranking. Another slide about market. The geographic distribution of sales is an important parameter for Earth, which is active in different projects to promote the internationalization of Earth observation services. The fragmentation of Earth observation could be sometimes a barrier for internationalization. What we can see here is that the sales in the Europe represent about 70% of the revenue. The domestic market is still the more important, with a significant increase, plus 7% compared to the previous one. But the other sales in Europe, so in another country, increased significantly with plus 9%. A particular point I will raise today is the increase of sales in North Africa, which represent now 15% of revenues, which is significant because it was 10% before. In terms of customer, the Earth observation market was and is still a public market. 51% of revenue come from the public sector. In the same time, it is a growing market, and the private company share is stable with 28%, which is a really good sign. The biggest change increased in public R&D sponsor, with an increase of 6%. So it really highlights the investment for the future. And this leads me to my last slide. At FIWIC, Joseph Becher, director of ESA Earth Observation Program, say we miss the link between research and business. And I just want to raise your awareness about a project called Parsec here, which is about commercialization. The aim of this project is to support SMEs to commercialize products and services for energy, environment, and food markets. So we will provide coaching, technical business catalyst, and fund up to 60K per company. If you are not aware, please have a look at this. Please share and apply. If you have any comment, please contact me. Contact ERSC.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. That is very exciting. Definitely, we see that the numbers tell us that the state and the health is very well for the Earth observation industry. Now, if you have a question directly to this report, please write it in the chat box. While I'm waiting for you, I have a question for you, Emmanuel. Do you see that, well, Copernicus releases a lot of data, European data, open and free. And that is into not a small part thanks to the involvement in GEO, the Group on Earth Observation. Do you see that there, or it may be hard to see from the numbers, but have you made any reflections on the effect of ERSC, representing all the European companies, being a participating organization in GEO? Or because it seems like the global market is expanding somewhat?
Yes, it is. It is. The view of the industry is really positive about this Copernicus and the open, free, and data policy. For the companies really foresee a strong interest and strong value with Copernicus. And what we can see specifically is about from SMEs on startup. Startup really considers that Copernicus gave them a competitive advantage, and it may have not been possible to create a company and to develop the business without it. So it's a really a good path to support the whole industry.
And can I just to sort of complement Emmanuel's answer? I agree entirely. I think what we're seeing is kind of a shift from purely just the data side, the imagery side in the EO sector, to much more of an emphasis on the services themselves. And so whereas you need imagery obviously to develop the services, and before only sort of the largest players could make their own data, procure their own data. So with Sentinel and also Landsat making available free data, you have kind of this flourishing of these small companies which take the free data and focus specifically on adding services to this. And these are typically SMEs or even startups. And so there definitely has been a very large contribution because of Sentinel due to this.
Okay, great. And that was a very nice segue to you then, Simon, because you will give us a sneak peek into the research that you have done in Euroconsult. But before you do that, I don't see any questions, so don't be shy. Ask us questions. It's not too late. Ask questions to Emmanuel also. But Simon, before I give you the floor, I give you the floor to introduce yourself and then give your presentation and a sneak peek into your findings.
All right, thank you, Bente. So it's a tough act to follow coming after Emmanuel. I'm happy to say that our report is very complementary. So there's a lot of the same findings. We have a bit of difference in scope, so we'll come to that in a second. But I'm happy to say that we don't clash, and we're kind of finding the same things in the industry. So I'll skip ahead to the presentation and talk about that.
Yeah, but Simon, a few words about yourself also first.
Oh, okay. So, yeah. Thank you. So my name is Simon Seminari. I am a senior consultant at Euroconsult. So we are a Paris-based consultancy specializing exclusively in the space sector. And I've been working here for about 3 or 4 years. And we are also obviously part of the NextGEOSS consortium working on that. So I will try to be as brief as possible. I will be speaking about our Earth observation research report, which is released every year. And this is a bit of a sneak peek because the report is actually being published next week. So this is kind of a world premiere, some of the first people being able to see this report. So a little bit about Euroconsult first. So I work for Euroconsult here in the bottom left. We recently purchased a similar company called SatConsult, based in Toulouse, about a year or two ago. And together, the two companies form the Euroconsult group. And as I said, we are a consulting group which specialize in the space sector and also the satellite-enabled verticals. So all the business basically which utilizes satellites. We have about 30 years of experience, et cetera, et cetera. I won't speak too much about it, but this is our company. And we basically have 4 set of activities. So starting in the top left corner and going counterclockwise, we have the consulting services. This is really the bread and butter of our business. We work with governments, we work with private sector players. We'll do monitoring their space programs. We'll support operations, etc. And it's in this context that we are working with the NextGEOSS project, Horizon 2020 project. We also do, moving to the bottom left corner, training. So this is for companies who need kind of a crash course in space, how it works, the technical side, but also sort of the market, the business side. Moving on to the summits, we organized 2 or 3 large-scale space conferences or events every year. The most recent one was the past September here in Paris, which is a week-long, we call it the Space Week, a week-long event which focuses half on satellite financing and the satellite communication side, but also half of the week is dedicated to Earth observation. So it's a very interesting event. And finally, we also publish research reports. And I'll be talking today about one of these reports, which is called Satellite-Based Earth Observation. This is the report. It really provides a 360-degree view on all issues relating to the EOS sector. And we cover the entire value chain. So what we call a value chain is the upstream and the downstream side. So upstream, you have from the beginning of the process, which is the actual manufacturing of the satellite. So in EO, we talk about what is sort of the bus, what are the payloads, is it going to be imagery or radar, the resolution, etc. We also talk about the launch services, so how many satellites are being launched, what is the value of those satellites, what kind of new services do they provide. We look at then the operations of the satellites being launched, and then we focus also on the entire downstream sector. So the businesses, which is very complementary to what Emmanuel's report covers, the military side, the government civil side, what are businesses doing, what are consumers, what is the data consumption trends we see. So it's a very comprehensive view of the entire sector. So what I thought would be interesting would be, instead of sort of covering a very shallow view of the entire report, is I would dive into the data and extract just sort of the key trends or elements which are of the most interest. So for example, on the manufacturing side, on the left you have the previous decade, so 2009 to 2018, whereas on the right you have a forecast of the next decade, 2019 to 2028. So we can immediately see, for example, an explosion in the number of satellites to be built and launched from 227 over the past 10 years to over 1,400 over the next 10 years. We can see obviously the revenue is increasing because there's more satellites to be built. But what's interesting is the average satellite cost has gone way, way down. So it's been slashed by 2. So there's more satellites being launched, but each individual satellite, the value of each individual satellite has gone way down. So this obviously means there's a trend towards small sats. So more satellites that are smaller and less expensive. And we're seeing actually a large amount of these are actually less than $50 million. So this is, a kind of a big trend that we're seeing. And we'll see what this actually means for the industry. So this is a very dense slide. I apologize. There's sort of a lot of data to pack in. So on the left here, we're comparing basically the mass versus sort of the price, the value. So the gray bars are how much mass in kilos are being launched per year. And then the black line is per year, what is the value of the satellites being launched. So we're not looking at the numbers, we're just looking at the mass and the value. And we're seeing that there's obviously over the past 20 years, so up until 2019, been a steady increase in the mass. So every year, more and more satellites are being launched. But from about 2019 to going forward, we're expecting not really a massive increase in the mass. We're seeing kind of a replenishment cycle. So we may have peaked in the amount of satellites going up in terms of mass. But what we're seeing is actually a huge amount of small sats going up. So satellites less than 500 kilos or even smaller. And we're also seeing, as we saw in the previous slide, the actual the price of the manufacturing and launch decreases. So we're seeing fewer of these, single large, 500 million, 600 million EO satellites, and we're seeing many, many more, 50 million, 60 million, maybe 5 of them or 6 of them going up at once. So maybe more tending towards more constellations versus these very high-end satellites. And on the right, we're actually looking at the number of satellites going up, and we're also comparing that with the resolution. So how good actually is the resolution? So we're seeing up about from 2012 or so. We're seeing basically this explosion of the small sat revolution. So essentially, operators have switched from launching 1 or 2 large, very powerful satellites to launching a constellation of individually less powerful satellites, but which work together to bring new services. So the number, obviously the pink line is the number. In 2012, we see basically a tripling or quadrupling, much, much larger number of satellites going up. Whereas the resolution is getting better and better every year. So it started at about 15 meters. GSD is sort of the sampling distance. So it's when you look at an image, every pixel corresponds to how many meters on the ground. So it's a way to measure how good the resolution is. So from 1998, which was about, the average was about 15 meters or so, down to about 4 meters today. And we've seen a bit of a plateau. So we're not really seeing, obviously some satellites are much better than 4-meter resolution, but the average is 4 meters. And this is because we're seeing kind of a shift towards, you're kind of getting diminishing returns beyond that. And we're seeing kind of the operators focusing on a satellite. So it's much better to have more frequent images. So a constellation where you get a much higher revisit rather than one satellite going around maybe once every 5 or 6 days. And if you have a cloud cover, you don't get an image. So kind of a shift in the tactics of the operators. And we're also seeing different payloads, for example, hyperspectral, so color images, radar images, and all these kind of tend to have less good resolution. So here too, this is kind of building on this this resolution question. So we're seeing actually not only operators doing more of the same, so more satellites, more imagery, but actually kind of operators which are kind of diversifying into different, what they're offering is different. So on the left, you can kind of see one strategy, whereas on the right, these larger circles, you see a different strategy. So there's trade-off obviously between swath and resolution. So the higher the resolution, if you can see down to 20 centimeters, 50 centimeters, 1 meter, every day you're covering less ground. So you're seeing, like a telescope or rather a microscope, you're looking at very, very fine detail, but you're not seeing as much of the actual terrain. So basically this is kind of the operators are kind of diversifying into, either do we offer lower resolution, so about 3 meters, 4 meters, but we have a huge swath, so we can cover millions of kilometers every day of collecting the data, or do we kind of specialize in very, very high resolution, so 1 meter or even centimeter level resolution, but the trade-off is you're only seeing a very small area. You might only collect a couple thousand kilometers per day. So this is kind of the big trade-off we're seeing. Different applications have different needs. And we're obviously seeing on the right here kind of a whole series of different sort of effects of this. So we're seeing obviously constellations. This, as I was saying, allows for higher revisit. So the vertical axis here is how many days does it take for the satellite to go over the same area of interest on the Earth and capture an image. So obviously a lot of these we're kind of seeing a lower revisit because it's interesting to see the same spot very, very frequently. One area could be, for example, farmers, if there's only one image every couple of days and there happens to be a cloudy day, you get no data. Obviously, if you want to do change detection, I want to see my field, how is it evolving over time? You want to have more frequent images. So this is kind of a big change we're seeing. And sort of a whole number of effects, but I'll skip over this. If there's any questions, I'm happy to come back to this. This is on the data side. It's one of my last slides. So as reflecting what Emmanuel was saying earlier, the defense market is about 2/3 of the total revenues generated. In 2018, you can see the total is about 1.5 billion, and the defense makes about 1 billion of that, so 2/3 of that. And then non-defense is everything else, so agriculture, oil and gas, whole forestry. There's a whole number of other sectors which is purchasing the data. This is just the data, by the way. We'll get to the services in a second. And as we were saying earlier, there's been an explosion as well of free imagery. So Landsat, Sentinel as well. Sentinel has experienced the Copernicus constellation has been phenomenally successful, and there's been a huge peak in the past 2 years or so in the amount of data being downloaded. But even Landsat, again, obviously there's new satellites coming out, but as we're saying, this free imagery unlocks services which can be built on top of the data. So we're seeing a huge interest in this free data, which even 6 years ago, 10 years ago, there was minimal interest, but now there's this whole new area which is being unlocked. So this is a very interesting thing to look at. Here too, so this is kind of taking a step back and looking at the EO sector from a whole. So starting from the left here, the old model was a very high data cost. So maybe 1 or 2 companies could actually capture imagery. So whether it's Airbus or Maxar. And so since data was sort of not it was a high cost because it wasn't really open to everyone. So you had a very expensive data. You typically had one dedicated customer. So Airbus would sell images to the French or European defense industries. However, this has changed. All these enablers we're seeing recently, the past 5 years or so, we're seeing new space. A lot of these startups emerging. We're seeing new constellations. We're seeing sort of the new ground segment. As Emmanuel was saying, more and more automation, bringing prices down. AI, allowing for a lot of automatic processing or algorithms, as well as basically platforms, of which NextGEOSS is one. There's many examples. So allowing kind of information as a service or software as a service. So all these have basically led to a new type of business model, which is the cost of data has gone way, way down. This has allowed a lot of new startups to actually, their business model is to take this data and to implement value-added services, the VAS. And what they're doing is there's no longer sort of one customer, the DoD or one big customer. We're opening up the EO data to multiple users, so non-sophisticated, farmers, scientists, insurers. So all these new users are able to use this data, which obviously results in a huge customer base increase. And fine, I'm going to skip this, but basically this is talking about the data hub. So getting the imagery and the services to the end user often requires a hub, somewhere where the user can actually access the data. Oftentimes these users are not sophisticated, so they kind of, well, I just want the data in an easily digestible form. So the industry solution has been these data hubs. So basically concentrating the data, providing the services directly in the platform, and delivering a sort of a turnkey solution to the end user. And then finally, my last slide is on the services themselves, the value-added services. So it's very interesting because the end users, they're not. We see a very different, basically, revenue model from the data itself and the services. So on the data, for example, defense, as we've been saying, buys 2/3 of the data. But on the services side, we actually see a lot of other sectors. We look at the environment, for example, forestry, fishery example. These are sort of unsophisticated users who aren't able to deal with the raw data, but they need services which make the data usable to them. Natural resources as well, so mining, oil and gas, forestry as well, and we're seeing also infrastructure as well. So there's a whole sort of much different user base once you introduce the services to the data, and we expect the market to double in the next 10 years. The biggest challenge here is actually uptake. How do we communicate to end users who traditionally aren't aware of the data, which exists, don't know how to use the data, don't know that EO data could potentially be used to solve their problems. So this is a big issue. How do we sort of communicate the value of EO data? How do we get more users to use this data? So the uptake is a big challenge. And then my final slide is sort of the key takeaways. So we think the next 2 to 3, 4 years are really, really important. It's a game-changing time period. We still see kind of some challenges at how do we monetize this? How do we, kind of, as I was saying, bring the data to the users? How do we communicate to the users? We're seeing a lot of new countries very, very eager to develop national capability, so more satellites going up. And we do see this is a very, it's an ecosystem in flux, so big changes in the near future. That's all. So thank you very much for listening. I know it's a big data dump all at once, but I hope it was useful to our listeners.
Absolutely. Indeed, Simon. I'm very impressed how much information you managed to give to us. It was a very interesting report. I see, actually, I do have a question, a very quick question for you, Simon, immediately. Gerhard is asking if agriculture falls under environment. In slide 12, he says, but I don't know if you remember which slide that was. But
I do. I have it here in front of me. Yes, so agriculture would fall under that. I'd have to actually double check this because I'm not sort of the chief editor of this report. I do because agriculture obviously is one of sort of the primary markets in many ways of EO. There's sort of lots of immediate benefits to agriculture. So I would imagine it falls under environment. It's not the most intuitive one. So either environment or natural resources, but I'm pretty sure it's environment, but I can get back to that to you almost right away if I can, actually.
Yes, yes.
Contact
Yeah,
your
you can
colleague.
do that. Yes, absolutely, Simon. That would be useful because we are going to deep dive into the agriculture sector with Martin now. So we can answer that afterwards. I have some questions too, but I think we can start. We can take my questions in the Q&A, and then you also please do ask questions in the chat box, and we will convey them to the speakers. So Martin, now we will look closer to one of the sectors that we have gotten an overview of the whole picture now. And we can dive deep into not only agriculture, but agri-technology startups. So a very exciting, I mean, this is what you both of you said, I think, Simon and Emmanuel, that you see the SMEs and these new companies popping up, and we will see how it looks on the agri-techno ecosystem for Europe. So Martin, a few words about yourself, and then let's hear about your first findings.
Yeah, thank you very much. As Simon said, there is a game changing going on there, and that led us to do a deep dive. Just a few words to myself, to introduce myself. My name is Martin Egger. I'm working with or at AOX, which is a Vienna-based company specialized on handling of big data and satellite data. I'm working there as a business analyst. I know Bente from the EU for Agri project, where I'm glad to be one of the project members. And besides that, I'm working as an entrepreneur, business angel, and investor. I'm quite experienced in the last years in investing in new companies, very early stage startups. I have invested in around 30 to 35 in the last years. Doing this together with the European Investment Fund, which is covering my investments. So this is a quite interesting relationship, probably also interesting for the AgTech sector. So now I will try to go into my presentation.
Yes.
So hope it works. So what is going on today? The idea is to give you a summary and, let me say, first finding on the startup ecosystem in Europe. I already mentioned something about myself and my perspective on it. So it's quite investment focused perspective on it. We did this within the EU for Agri project. We did a survey on agri apps. It was a quite deep dive into the sector. Here on this slide, you can see an overview of the worldwide agricultural startups, early stage and later stage, shown in CB Insights 2017. It's around 100 to 150 startups that are shown there. We have got 9 segments where we put the startups in there, from farm management software to smart irrigation and next-gen farms. You see that on the slides. Only 2 years later now, I was trying to get some latest figures on that. So we see that we have got around 250 startups in the AgTech sector at the moment within the European Union. And when we have a look abroad, I found at least 1,100, 1,200 startups. So in fact, what we see is that there is, a game-changing period at the moment. Very lots and lots of startups are coming to the market. Lots of them are only in the very first stages, just founded or in the stage of proof of concept. So many of them were founded 2016, 2017, and later. what I try to do is to give you some learnings. I have to say that we are just in the middle of the project, so it's half time, so it's not the final conclusion, but there are some early learnings we have at the moment. They are based on about 50 to 55 startups that I was really in contact with. I met a lot of them, and some of them I really did kind of due diligence from an investment perspective. So this is the data behind my first finding. And the first learning is I had a look at the stage, and which stage is a typical startup in the AgTech sector. And as I mentioned before, many of them are really very, very young. So that means that they are in an early stage phase. We call that proof of concept stage, where the founders try to find this product market fit, do lots of demos. What we rarely see in this early stage startups is that they don't have scalable service in place at the moment. So as Emmanuel mentioned before, I think there is a quite big gap from having these demos, this proof of concept, to as we say, proof of market or market fit, where they have a business model and where you really see that there is a scalable business behind. I think this is a quite big milestone, hard to achieve. And there is something probably where you can find a gap between these early stage startups and the later stage startups. They really show that they can scale their business. So this is something that really I think it's necessary to mention that. I asked lots of them what is their business model, or what is at least the idea of their business model when they are in the early stages. So many of them have the farmer in mind. So the farmer as a client, very often the farmer as the user that should pay for their services. And I'm not really convinced about this business model, because when you look at the agricultural structure around Europe, we have a very small size structure out there, many small farmers, not really a high amount of big companies out there. So for this reason, I'm in doubt whether this is really the best way to see the farmers as paying clients and paying members of the services. I also had a look, not too deep, but I had a look at the existing accelerator programs, which is early stage. So where we find the founders with a vision and help them to get their first products for proof of concept. When I compared with my other experience in other segments, I could say that there is a lack of accelerator programs in AgTech. I was very surprised that obviously even in Germany there is no AgTech accelerator, no focused AgTech accelerator in place at the moment. I was invited a couple of months ago that to be mentor in one of these accelerators to come, but even this initiative is not really good funded, so I'm not pretty sure if this really could take place in the next couple of months or the next year. So what I see is that there's a lack of this early stage programs. The next slide is something about funding. I was really trying to get as much figures as I could. Lots of them based on platforms like Crunchbase. You see it in the slide. There is what we see is there is lots and lots of funding starting in Q2 2016, Q1 2017. There is kind of hockey stick where really a lot of funding rounds occurred. In the whole AgTech sector shown at Crunchbase, we've got more than 1,000 funding rounds overall, and lots of them in the last 2 years. The total funding amount, almost $4 billion US. So it's quite a huge amount of money in the sector. But what I learned when I did this deep dive, that there is a quite big difference between startups within the European community, within the European Union and abroad. We see that lots and lots of really big fundings from privately owned VCs in countries like the US, probably also Switzerland. As I saw quite big funding rounds in UK, Ukraine, also Israel. But within the EU, I see really the focus on very small funding rounds compared with abroad. So it brings me to a kind of conclusion that that this sector is in the European Union is not so attractive to private investors, and was trying to search whether there are privately held VCs with this Earth observation and AgTech focus within, or with the focus of the European Union. And I see that this is only a few working on that. We've got 300 investors in Europe in these sectors. The biggest ones coming from European community programs, so more than 10% out of Horizon 2020 European Investment Fund, and it is a lack of privately owned VCs in this sector. I had some discussion with investors that are in different sectors and also in AgTech, and I asked them why they are not really focusing on investments in the European Union. And what I get as a feedback is that it's quite hard to see that the sector that is really relying on subsidies and public grants could get to a milestone of proof of market in a quite short time. So everybody's really fearing that if the subsidies are not coming in the way that they are proposed, that's probably hard for a startup to get in this later stage where they could really live, let me say it like this, without relying on public grants. We in EU4Agri, the CAP reform is the main topic. We wanted to learn whether these startups have an idea what is going on with the CAP reform 2020, and what was really shown in all these meetings I had, that there is a lack of awareness of the CAP reform. I think in all these discussions I had with this more than 50 startups I was in contact with, hardly someone knows that the CAP reform is going into the monitoring topic, and this was not really on their radar, to be honest, and this was quite surprising. And I asked them whether they are in contact with paying agencies or with authorities in their countries. And what I learned there is that they are hardly in touch with them. What I get as feedback is that there are high requirements to meet the standards of a supplier for, let me say, paying agencies. You have to be in the market for quite some years to be a supplier for this public projects. And they are not they don't get any invitations to tenders from this side. So it's hard for them to get in touch. Some told me that it's even hard for them to get a chance to do their demos because they don't find anybody that helps them getting the proof of concept done. To summarize this at the end, is the EU4Agri is as a project here to analyze all the information we get about all these IT initiatives in agriculture, and we try to focus on the opportunities we get from these game-changing on the satellite business. We are now in the midterms of the project, so it's a preliminary conclusion of the market potential that we can give at the moment, but it's still unclear for us what is the outcome. But from my personal perspective, I would say that there is a problem with a quite low engagement of private investors in this sector, especially within the European Union. In AO4Agri, we try to monitor the sectors, at least for the next 12 months within the project. And at the end, we also want to give some recommendations for funding strategies and probably some ideas how we could focus on bringing private equity into this segment. So thanks for your attention. I'm happy to answer all questions you have.
Thank you so much, Martin. I think we got a very nice, a deep dive into something very relevant. We started with Emmanuel. I noticed that agriculture was the second largest sector in the Earth observation industry in Europe. And then Simon underlined the challenge of the take-up. And this is exactly what you were describing. I'll turn on my camera as well. It's exactly what you were describing, Martin. Very, detailed. What is the challenges? Some of the challenges that you need to overcome in order to have this take-up that Simon was describing. So, any comments from the speakers while we are waiting for questions in the chat box? Don't be shy. Ask in the chat box. Yes.
Okay, I'll just jump in until we get comments. Thanks, Martin. I thought that was very interesting, actually. Well, first, I'd like to answer the question I got. So agriculture actually falls under, for us, natural resources, which is 16%. So it's one of the largest ones. And this comes to my question for Martin. We find that there's definitely, especially the agriculture sector, a very challenging uptake from farmers. So a lot of people have solutions. You should use EO data. You should use this. You can, precision agriculture. But there's actually a very low uptake rate, especially in Europe, in farmers. And at our Space Week, I was actually moderating a panel with on this sector, so basically EO for agriculture. And we had the panelists was Vito was there actually. We had another European company called SES Vanderhaven, so it's kind of a Dutch research for agriculture. And finally, Lando Lakes, which is a US farmer cooperative. And it's interesting to contrast the European model versus the American model, where there seems to be in Europe a very, as you said, lots of small farmers, and it's difficult to communicate the value of EO. The very maybe traditionalist. They don't necessarily see, this high-tech gadgets. It's very difficult. They're all sort of, as you said, many small farmers, so it's difficult to get kind of scale. Whereas in the US, they seem to be more open to using technology. There's a cooperative. There's a lot of data analysis. So do you have any, Martin, sort of experience with the US side, which is one part of the question? And the second question was, how would you sort of overcome this reluctance from farmers? Or how would you communicate the value to sort of increase the uptake in the European agriculture sector?
That's not easy, not so easy to answer, because I don't have the really clue on that. But starting with the first question, I was asking my colleagues on the investment side why they are investing in North and South America when they're doing agtech investments, and they all said that it's quite easy for them finding partners for the first step, proof of concept. You've got big farms, they are well organized, they have enough budget, they see the value, they see the value at least at the end of the day with more yield, more revenues on that. So it's quite easy for them to sell that. And asking them why this is so tricky within the European Union, the feedback is always the same. Most of the European Union farmers are really relying on subsidies. So this is something where really they are focused on. So they do everything they can to optimize their subsidies. This is I think we don't want to hear that, but it's very often the case when you're talking with these small, medium-sized farmers. So they have to optimize their business by optimizing the subsidies, and this is quite tricky when you come with new offerings, when you tell them whatever will be in the future. But yeah, they are all focused on optimizing the subsidies from the paying agencies. So I think this is at least a challenge. That leads me to my personal conclusion that the farmers they have to get these services for free. We have to find other parties and stakeholders that are willing to pay for the services. There are insurance companies. There are paying agencies that could be partners of many of these services, and there approximately are some other tech big companies that are really willing to pay if they get data that could be helpful for them and for their business, but not the farmers, at least not the mid-sized and small-sized farmers.
And I may add a question on this. Do you consider that on the EO side, the service provider, they have very good understanding about the challenge farmers or cooperative have to face? I raise this because we made a project EO for oil and gas a few years ago. And it really helped to have in the same room community from the oil and gas and service providers identify what are the challenges, what are the services which may help to solve this challenge. And we are going at Earth to duplicate in a way this initiative with the agri community next year. So it's an important topic for us too.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I was really I had a big surprise when I was doing my survey that there is no knowledge about cap reform, about monitoring, and all that. What's going on there? Nobody knows what is changing out there at the satellite business. So for this reason, I'm pretty sure that also the EU for Agri project is a milestone on this to help the community knowing what it's going on there, and probably this is also a necessary step to get us to get forward. But at the end, the question is who pays for that. This is always the question we have. Not even there's not a problem of startups only. It's also for all these small and medium enterprises out there. You have to ask this question, and you have to get an idea who is willing to do that. And I think the knowledge and all these opportunities you see out there is one thing. Knowing this is the next thing, but the willingness to pay for it, I'm not sure how this could work from the perspective of the farmers.
Yeah, I think so. Since I'm also involved in EO for Agri, not only NextGEOSS, I know the discussion we've had in EO for Agri and trying to identify organizations that represent the farmers in order to avoid or to help what you described, Martin, that the farmers themselves are too small or don't know, etc. But they have organizations representing the farmers, and each of the countries in Europe sort of have a consultancy advisor service for the farmers. So those we have been looking into addressing or communicating with them in order to inform them collectively. And then, of course, we do also have some farmers that are interested in experimenting, that are big enough and have the mindset. I mean, the mindset is also an important factor in agriculture. Arthur is asking a question. Thank you, Arthur. Maybe big public-funded project like Send to Agri and Send for CAP are affecting the role and potential impact of Earth observation-based startups for the agriculture sector. Any comments on that? Have you seen anything that could indicate that, Simon?
Well, I actually was going to defer to Martin. I think he's probably more well-positioned to answer this question.
Yeah. All of you. Martin?
From my point of view, these projects help to get visibility. What is possible? We can share the outcome. It shows the ability of the let me say the IT services out there and the data out there. So this makes a lot of sense. I'm pretty sure that it brings a lot of startups to new ideas of services. If it helps them to get to a proof of market, let me say the sustainable business model, I'm not sure about that, but it's obviously the case that it helps to bring new services to the market because we see what is possible.
I would like to use this opportunity actually concerning the uptake, Simon, that you mentioned, because NextGEOSS, the NextGEOSS project will, by the way, continue beyond the end of the project time, which is mid-2020. But what we have developed is an onboarding process that at least contribute to a certain degree. If you are not, the farmer is probably not, except for a few, would not be the right target. But those are, for those in the companies, for instance, are interested in creating a company, the onboarding process that we have established or developed in NextGEOSS, we're really hand-holding the users of the Earth. So users, in this case, developers who are developing, taking the Earth observation data, transforming it to an application or a service, using the platform. You mentioned data hubs, Simon, as a general way of making the data available, right? That's the trend across all the providers, data providers, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing, I mean, that's kind of the big challenge of the moment. So we have, the data is obviously there. There's plenty of systems providing imagery. There's a lot of software developers which are building their skills. Now the last sort of chain is, this uptake part. And we're seeing a lot of, I don't think there's any easy answer. I think sort of if you had the answer, then you could be hired some big company and make a lot of money. But we are seeing a lot of strategy. So before, about a few years ago, all the the major data providers would have their own platform. So Airbus would have one. Now we're actually that's not enough. So we're seeing, for example, Airbus a few weeks ago said they have sort of a startup in Berlin, Up 42, I think it's called, where Airbus is working, like holding the hands of this sort of software development company, these developers, and it's saying, you know what, even though we're an Airbus company, we're kind of sponsoring this startup. You don't actually only need to use Airbus data. They're actually opening up. You can use any data. If they're targeting specifically developers. So they're kind of, we can see companies trying different strategies, trying to kind of ring fence using only our data is not working. So trying, we take any data. I think we're definitely in a phase where there's a lot of sort of different companies experimenting with different models to see what works. A lot of kind of throwing ideas against the wall and see what sticks. There hasn't been sort of a clear winner yet. But I think we will probably see on a sort of a successful model emerge soon, I think. And part of it is just kind of building momentum. So as more companies do this, word gets out, different end users become more aware that the data is there, it's getting easier to access, easier to use. Companies are getting better at having sort of a turnkey solution. So the end user might say, well, I don't really care where the data comes from, what it is. I just need the solution, like a yes, no answer, or show me the final product. And companies are getting better at delivering that. But as Emmanuel was saying, sometimes you need to get sort of the end user and the service provider in a room together so they can actually communicate. But it's difficult to do because there's a very fragmented market. EO has, look at the SATCOM, it's just to communicate. So it's a very easy to understand universal need. EO has 1,001 different potential uses. So it's difficult to make kind of a one size fits all.
Yeah, absolutely. And but so Copernicus is one of the biggest, well, if not, I think actually the world's biggest provider of Earth observation data. And so Emmanuel, maybe following up a little bit on what Simon said here, do you know what the vision for Copernicus for startups are?
Well, this is something we didn't really investigate in the survey. What we know is that there is a continuity which is really important for the industry. Continuity in terms of services, in terms of assets, so real satellites. There is a lot of discussion about the different services, Copernicus services, and potential new ones. So this is really important to understand what are the real need of the industry in order to define which one are the most relevant or will continue to help with this user uptake need. Absolutely.
Yeah. We are approaching. Well, actually, we are a little bit over time. But before I end, I will. Gerard provided here a comment that I will read. Sen4Cap will deliver open source software for everybody, so to use and gain experience. The project should not be seen as a competitor to startups, but rather like an enabler. Yeah. So there's a need of, like, it's a very manifold and diverse landscape that we are addressing. As you said, Simon, there are, Earth observation is everybody basically can use Earth observation in some way or another. So it makes it complicated to.
I will just kind of respond quickly to that comment. I mean, I think it's governments need to be careful not to kind of push out industry, because, for example, when Copernicus, when they announced the data would be the free and open data policy, a lot of industry players objected to that, saying, well, we sell data, and by providing data for free, you're essentially cannibalizing our market. So I think governments need to be careful not to sort of, actually make sure that it is a complementary and not a competitor. So I'm not too familiar with Sen for the CAP, but that challenge always exists, and it's not just to say, oh, it's complementary, because sometimes you actually are occupying a commercial space.
Yes,
I agree. It's really important to have a very strict definition. What will be public? What will be could be commercial, in order to define a business. It is not when the satellite is launched then you can change rules. Visibility.
No, so Emmanuel, I remember a few years back, prior to the Copernicus data becoming free, actually open and free, that the industry, the Earth observation industry, was concerned. Do you see that have the industry adapted and changed their business models? Because business models can be innovative and develop accordingly. I mean, it's not the end of the world. I mean, we see continuous transitions. Have you made some reflections on that?
We had some, yes, absolutely. We have some. I would say adapt is really the word. It has been a game changer, no doubt. A lot of medium resolution were commercialized before. They had to change, and they find a way to. They have been flexible enough, innovative in order to continue. And we can see that the growth of data acquisition, data distribution still increase, and not only thanks to the public needs. Satellite sensors which are operated for public entities. It raises a question for me based on the presentation made by Simon, in a way, because we have a huge increase in number of sensors. So the bottleneck will be the ground station. How are they going to manage this? We already know that some new players, for example, Amazon, has defined this ground station as a service. So it really highlights that there is new change in the future, and it will have significant impact on the current players. For
sure. I mean, the ground segment is definitely kind of an underlooked at aspect, and as you said, Amazon, we're seeing there too a lot of sort of adaptation. There's even kind of the Airbnb of the ground segment. So companies who are there to kind of match availability in the ground segment with players who need the ground segment to kind of get the data down from the satellite. So we're definitely, and to answer Bente's question, these kind of policy decisions often force adaptation and change. And I think there's sort of a correlation between the date when the EU announced, the open and free data policy, with kind of big mutations in the EO sector. So all of a sudden, as Emmanuel was saying, low and medium resolution, basically imagery stopped being a viable business model. And so that's when you saw a lot of small sats. Well, companies said, okay, well, we'll launch, instead of having one small resolution, low resolution, we'll have a constellation. So then the resolution may not be the best, but we offer daily revisit, or we only offer high resolution. So it did offer, it kind of forced innovation, it forced adaptation and change in the market. But anyway, I'll stop there. We can talk all day about this. But
yes. I promised we should end at 3 o'clock to you, Simon. So we are. Thank you for staying on. It's indeed a very interesting topic, and thank you so much to all of you, to Martin, to Emmanuel, and to you, Simon. Please share this those of you who are actually signed up, registered for this webinar. You will get the replay in your inbox. Don't be afraid to share this with your community. We want to engage as many as possible in this discussion. And before I actually end, I would like to make a bit of a commercial for the next webinars in the NextGEOSS webinar series, where we will discuss in October, the next few weeks, in October, we will discuss interoperability between all these different data sets. And you can sign up for the NextGEOSS webinar series and get your reminder in your inbox, or just follow us on Twitter, NextGEOSS on Twitter. So thank you so much. See you the next time. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.
bye.
Ciao, thank you.
Thank you.